Hello, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Big Apple Film Festival panel with, we have Dean Carpentier today. He's going to be talking about pitching hour-long dramas. We have, so what I'm going to do is Dean will introduce himself. It's a Q&A, but if you have questions during what he's talking about, if you want to just, if you want him to clear something up a little bit, you can post your question in the chat box. But we'll have time near the end to actually have a real Q&A. We should. So welcome, Dean. You can introduce yourself and we can get started.
Hello, everyone, or whoever's out there. I don't see any faces, so I'm going to assume there are bodies out there. Thanks. Welcome. So my bio gives you just a tiny bit of highlights. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into my bio because I think it's much more important that I can help give you some context into how I got to where I was, just very briefly, as a means of understanding that there are a variety of paths to becoming a working writer. And I've got an outline here. I wrote myself a pitch so that I can actually get all this in. There's a lot in this topic. And I'm going to refer to that a lot, so bear with me here. So first of all, so it's, I don't know, I'm not talking, when I'm talking the 1 hour, I'm talking dramatic 1 hours, like essentially cable streaming 1 hours, not procedurals. I mean, the irony is that I mostly write cable dramas, but in my shows that I've staffed on have been procedurals. That's just the luck of the draw. Every year you read pilots, you read all the pilots, your agents give you a list of pilots and you read them, and then you read the summaries, and you basically, you meet with, you go out and you meet with showrunners, right? And you pitch how you're going to, how you would contribute to their show, right? So it all just depends on the luck of who you connect with, and whether they connect with you, and honestly, whether they feel like they can spend, 8-10 hours in a room for 3, 6, 9 months at a go. So it really ends up having to be with how functional and how good you are to kind of be around. So anyway, and I'm talking like Sopranos, Fargo, Succession, The Americans, Last of Us, like dramas, like in that sense, classically, right? So that's just my sensibility. It's my taste. Yours invariably will be very different. I think the trick with that is, the adage is write what you know, but I would say it's not write what you know, because people don't really know what they know or like how to actually convey that. I think you should write what interests you. Write the things that appeal to you, right? If there's a show, if there's a showrunner who shows you, like, track that and be thinking about those and keeping lists of the people that you want to be talking to and trying to reach out to. So this intro for me is a little more of just giving you some top level stuff, and then I'm going to drill down into some of the little sections within that kind of session overview. Developing and pitching, like, I know it, if you haven't done it and you've only seen it, or you've been to festivals, you're like tangentially connected to it, understanding, it feels daunting and it feels very intimidating, because you're invariably pitching to two kinds of rooms, right? So I referred, like, obviously there's a bunch of different rooms, but there are really two kinds of rooms you're going to be in. One room I consider Easter Island, right? The whole stone-faced statues on Rapa Nui. So basically there are these rooms you're going to be in where you're pitching, and they're hard rooms because it's literally stone-faced executives sitting across from you. They're not going to laugh at any of your jokes, no matter how funny your pitch is, no matter how great your beats are, nothing. It's really unnerving. And you're thinking that your pitch is falling flat the entire time. I mean, everybody kind of has the same degree of just insecurity, and sitting across from a bunch of strangers is no different. So you're going to feel like you're failing. You're going to feel like they hate it. You're going to feel like you're doing an awful job. Your job is to push those voices away, because invariably none of that is the case. It's hard to follow somebody talking at you for a half an hour, because as a development exec, as a producer, you're processing the information. You're trying to figure out how it works for you, how it works for your network, how it fits into their schedule. They also have to pitch your idea upwards to their boss and to their development team at large. There are assistants taking notes. Some execs will take specific notes. Just know that what's happening is people are concentrating really hard. They're really just trying to see your show and get it. And so, you know, because their jobs ultimately depend on finding the great shows, finding the great new voices, and also not missing out on the great shows. Because every great show, Breaking Bad, Sopranos, Mad Men, I mean, the list goes on. Those shows were turned down by everybody. And those shows were pitched by seasoned, established writers, right? So nobody wants to be the guy that passed on Breaking Bad. Nobody wants to be the guy that passed on The Last of Us. Nobody wants to be the guy that passed on I Will Destroy You, right? So just recognize that, you know, I think one of the biggest things you can do is just to recognize that you just focus on it, you do your job, you prepare your pitch, you rehearse it, you rehearse it, you rehearse it, you rehearse it for friends. You need to memorize your pitch, and then you kind of I create a cheat sheet that I kind of keep on my lap, right? And I'm pretty good now at, like, my finger kind of follows with it as I go. So, but you just, whatever, you figure out what works for you. So, and the reality is that, you know, pitching is just, you're finding a compelling way to tell a story. You know, I have a picture that I created for myself, an outline. I haven't had a chance to memorize it, so I'm literally referring to it all the time. So, but you get better at this stuff, right? You know, it's joke telling. Pitching is basically your setups. You're creating setups and payoffs. You're giving us resolutions to stories, the things that we rarely get in life, right? So, you know, and your characters, you're the same. Like, your characters want things, right? And we want things, and we're constantly devising ways to get things that we want, or to convince people to like us, to convince people to give us things, right? So pitching is always just telling a story. And if you can always kind of remember that, you just have an interesting story you want to tell, right? And people want to hear stories. It is the sort of consistent thing throughout our species, is telling stories, right? It's how we make sense of the world. The Joan Didion quote, right? So you want to know who the best pitchers are? Children, right? Children are getting what they want, but nobody else really wants to give them, day in and day out, right? So I'm not saying to be a child, but you really can't, you know, but you got to recognize that. You just go easy on yourself, be kind to yourself, and recognize that if you're pitching to somebody, it's because it's their job to hear pitches, right? So, again, these are top levels, so bear with me. I'll drill down and get more details. But so your success or failure, it's never about you, right? I mean, it's a cliche, and it's a cliche for a reason, because it's true. Nothing is ever about you. You're walking on the street, nobody's paying attention. Hopefully they're paying attention to your pitch, but there's no formula, and there's no mystery to why one person's show gets picked up, or they sell a pitch and another person doesn't, right? The sort of dirty little secret of the business is that there's no mystery to how TV gets made, right? It's a business. Networks are filling holes in their schedule. Their procedural medical show ended, and they need a new one that year. So everybody's going to be pitching a medical procedure to NBC or to, you know, CBS or whoever. You know, it's a business. Budgets, schedules, there are egos, there are, you know, everybody, there's winners and there's losers, right? And the thing about it is that the right idea, it's the right idea at the right time, right? It's the right idea with the right person. You know, invariably now in TV, you're finding attachments. It used to be in movies, the trick was to find attachments for your script, a director, a star. That kind of applies now too. Like the package is not, you know, unless you're Sean Ryan or Ryan Murphy or Shonda Rhimes. Like, there are people out there that can kind of continue to pitch and sell things because they're a brand, and they've consistently proven that that their shows make money. So there's no winning formula, right? And like everything in life, you know, pitching, kind of finding your way in the world as a working writer, it all comes down to luck and timing. And I don't care what everybody's going to tell you, it's different, but it's luck. It's luck, and you know that you can kind of create your luck in that sense, that you can build out a network of people and create great work and make sure that you get it in front of people, right? So to that point, there's no secret, but there really is. There are two things that everybody will agree are sort of the foundations.
Uh-oh. I think we lost him. Let me see if he comes back in. This is interesting. Well, that's me.
Oh, wow. Okay. So,
We back?
are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. Okay, great. So look here, back to, so, you know, luck and timing, and but there are a couple things that you can always kind of count on that are going to be the foundations for anything you do, right? But specifically becoming a working writer, and you know, getting to sell pitches, getting to present pitches, and that's your relationships and your writing samples, right? So the quality and the depth of your connections, the friends that you make, the professionals, the execs that you meet, and your writing, the quality of your writing, how great, how good your material is, everything will flow from this, right? Every single job I've ever gotten, everything I've sold, everything I've optioned came out of a relationship I had with somebody, and it came out of my writing, right? Because my agents and managers, they've never gotten me a job. All of my work, everything I've gotten, are we there? Everything I've gotten basically has come from my work or the relationships that I've nurtured. You know, because the idea is that, you know, the luck you create is based on, you know, the more people know you, the more people like you, the more people can find you and they can champion you, right? So I want to and I'll give you a little bit of context a little bit later into how, you know, a couple of possible paths here, because I know a part of this is like, you may be able to figure out how to pitch a great show and write a great pilot, but unless you know how to kind of find your way into that world, it doesn't help you, right? Because otherwise you just have a bunch of doorstops, right, in your script. So, so I started writing features, and I was lucky enough that my first feature got me a manager, and a producer optioned it, right? That same producer optioned that script 3 times over the course of a decade, right? So that was kind of my life for a decade, was writing features, selling something, optioning something. You know, I was doing work along the side. I was working in commercials, producing. So you kind of always want to take care of your personal needs. You know, make sure that you have some stability in your life that is not connected to the writing, because that's a constant up and down, right? You're always pitching to try to get your next job, right? So so basically, at some point, you know, my manager was just kind of tired of hearing me complain about like all of my scripts being in sort of in that development hell, right? And she's like, "Why don't you write TV?" I hadn't watched TV for 20 years, so I started watching TV. I watched The Sopranos and I watched The Wire, you know, the classics of the contempt of our prestige world. And a kind of a bell went off. It was like, oh, TV is not just Saved by the Bell, all these like goofy shows that we had on TV, right? So. The you know, TVs, you know, it was always, I thought that TVs were basically novels, right? I thought that features were novels, and, you know, and TV was what else? But the reality is movies are short stories. A TV series is a novel, right? So so think about that in those terms of like, you're able to get the nuance out of that, and you're able to kind of like pursue characters in the long haul. So you want to be thinking about that. And that's a great way to think about your story, a great way to find stories. Like, anyway, I'll get into that in a little bit. So I had a pilot set in the medical world. Again, I'm not writing genre stuff. I write it, everything comes out of like, starts with characters and worlds and things that interest me, and then it grows from that. But I wrote something set in a medical world. A feature producer who also did some TV, and she was also an instructor, writing instructor, I think at UCLA. She read a feature of mine. She loved it. She wanted to turn it into a TV show. She had a deal at Touchstone. So we met, and she, you know, said, "Hey, I'd like to turn your show into a TV show. So turn your feature into a TV show." So this is one of the things that you'll learn. The hard part was like, I was so tired of that script. I was so done with it. And like, I was like, I don't know how to turn this into a TV show. And so this is part of the job, right? It's a variation on that. You're constantly going to be finding yourself in the situation where you read, you read a pilot for a showrunner show, or you watch the pilot if for some reason you're being brought into the game late during upfronts or after it's been greenlit, and you need a job, but this show doesn't speak to you. Like the job is figuring out how to figure out how to find something interesting in that story that appeals to you, right? So that you can basically convert your experience into stories that fit the show, that you can actually get excited about. So the same thing happened when when I was hired, when I was basically, I was a development exec at Relativity when it was fuller, when it had features, and they have a reality division still, but they made Limitless, they owned it, they were looking for a writer to adapt it. They had a seasoned showrunner who wanted a co-writer, somebody who could kind of do most of the work because he was already working on an existing show, but they needed the senior showrunner to guarantee that the job would get done in case the person they hired didn't. So I'd never seen the show. I watched the show. I did not like the show. I had nothing, right? But manager's like, just say yes and figure it out, right? So I said yes, and we figured out how to take, right? I came up with an origin story basically that predated the series, and it was like a back and forth. Like this is part of the process of developing. I was actually brought in to pitch on 3 separate occasions, to continually pitch on, to expand on something I had pitched or something the showrunner had come up in the room who I was pitching to, and I don't know, they started with a dozen writers and it was down to a handful, and each of us had to come in multiple times, pitch a story. And what you realize initially as you're doing this, you're not getting paid to do this, and you think like, Jesus, they're just pulling me in to steal my ideas. But you can't think like that. You have to recognize that people are just trying to find a way to tell the story that they have, and it's more work and more effort and more pain in the neck to steal your idea than it is to find the person that fits the idea. So your job is just to be yourself and to be as interesting and inventive as possible. So on that Limitless job, basically, I just kept pitching a take, and I just, what you realize is that every single meeting you take, every interaction with somebody is a pitch, because pitching is just selling, right? And the better you are at it, the more it's not going to feel like a sales pitch, right? Like the best, these kind of like branded entertainment, these commercials, these things that come out, you don't know what it's for, but it feels like you're watching some lifestyle piece. The idea is you want to kind of be thinking about how can you effortlessly move through the world and relate to people in ways that are telling your experience, and when you're trying to find a job, not feeling like you're desperate or trying to pitch something, right? So you just dig in, you find a way to be resourceful, more resourceful, you make sure that you're reading everything, paying attention. Yeah. And sometimes you get lucky and you get the job, and then it only gets harder, right? Because getting the job is a quarter of the battle, right? So just kind of general stuff. So short of that thing, it's all going to come down to the relationship with the exec who hires you. Like that job, I was pitching against far more established writers. I had a really great relationship with the exec at Relativity because I developed a couple things with him. He had read pilots of mine, he had read scripts of mine that he loved, and so I developed some things with them. And the showrunner loved my take, and we got along in the room, right? Because again, everything comes down to do they want to spend time with you in a room? You may have the best idea in the world, but if you're antagonistic or you're arrogant or you're too proud, like nobody wants you in that room. Nobody wants to sit with you for 10 hours a day pitching stories. So part of that goal is just always recognize that, you want to be the person that is not only indispensable, but that people get along with, that people like, right? So, and again, every meeting you take, even informal casual meetings, everything is a job interview. Everything is a pitch, right? So, and just because as I go further and drill down a little bit more here, just understand that I'm just one guy. I'm one person with a very specific set of experiences and skills and certain luck and not luck. And you're going to do more work. You're going to do far more work than is ever going to get produced, right? But everything is cumulative. Everything you do, will contribute in some way, and everything's going to come back to you. If you're introduced in being a writer and you want to work as a working writer, just everything is cumulative. Everything, just you have to just store everything away. Anyway, so look, you're going to have your own path. Take what I say that speaks to you. If you find that more people are saying the same thing that I'm saying, yeah, maybe that's something you want to pay attention to. If it doesn't speak to you at first, but if this is the same advice I give to people who are getting notes on their material, right? So if somebody reads your script, if 10 people read your script and all 10 of them have the same problem with a piece of your script, chances are you want to take a look at that and figure out what's not working. If 10 people read your script, if 20 people read your script, and they each have a different thing about your script that's not working for them, chances are you want to take a look at that stuff, but chances are it's not your script. It's the fact that everybody moves through the world with their own filter and their own experience and their own taste. They may just not like a character. They may just not like how you tell the story. So just recognize that, you take the information that helps you, you take the advice you can, get as much advice as you can. And if it speaks to you, take it. If it doesn't, file it away. 10 other people say the same thing that you thought was ridiculous. You maybe want to take a look at that, right? Okay. So, so basically, so all of what I'm doing here is predicated on the fact that you are in one of two places. One is you have written pilots already, or two is you haven't written pilots, but you have ideas that you want to pitch or develop and hope somebody will pay you to write them. And it's also caveated on you don't have a lot of, you either don't have a lot of connections, there's no nepotism in your life, nobody can make a phone call and get you a meeting with J.J. Abrams or get you a meeting with Jen Salke at Amazon. Like, the idea is that you're trying to find your way into the world, or if you have connections, you have an idea that you really want to refine before you tap your connections, right? Because you're only going to get to ask friends and family who are connected. If you meet people that are connected, you're only going to get to ask them so many times to make a call on your behalf, right? And your job is to be as prepared as possible and to have a very clearly defined pitch that tells your story in a very kind of concise manner in which you're pulling people along. You want people waiting on your next word in the same way that you want people turning the page in your script, right? So be as fresh and captivating. So, but to this point, it's unlikely that someone's going to take a pitch from you or want to hear a pitch from you unless they've read something of yours that they liked, right? Every single meeting that I've ever gotten is based on somebody read a script, they loved it, and they loved the writing. The story may not have been for them, but they loved the writing and wanted to meet me. Because your execs and your producers' jobs is building a stable of people who can provide them with a steady stream of material. Yeah, that's it. You just want to be one of those people that you have to have a wide circle. So you want to know as many producers and execs who like you, who like your work, that you continually reach out to connect, to pitch ideas to, right? So you have to have a great sample. A sample that's going to show that you can generate fresh ideas, fresh, captivating ideas, and that you can sustain them over a season. So part of, back to that conversation when I was pitching that Limitless thing, the back and forth, the multiple pitchings, was a test that I realized later on. The showrunner was to some degree trying to see which one of us who was in the final round was going to be able to provide consistent ideas and be able to take an idea that he has and incorporate it into something we were doing in a way that felt unique and interesting to my experience and who I am, but also, basically fit the needs of that particular showrunner's idea for the show, right? Because when you're pitching a take on a show, you have to model your voice, you have to model the way you tell a story on the pilot that the showrunner wrote or on the existing show that the showrunner's been writing, right? So, anyway, so you want to have, so I'm going to talk a little bit about generally how it works. What are we at, 8:20? Okay, so real quick, just the context of like starting in and not having connections and getting a chance to sell stuff without having connections. It happens. Lightning strikes. There are people from time to time will have no credits and come out of the blue and sell a pitch, right? Invariably, they've always got some sort of sample of writing that somebody liked, because you're not going to hire an architect who's never designed a house, right? So And invariably people want to get an architect who designs the kind of house that they want, right? So everybody's just trying to find the shortest path to getting something on TV, right? So there's a guy named Mickey Fisher. He sold a show called Extant, EXTANT, with Halle Berry a handful of years ago. Look him up. He's also really great at talking about his experience and how he made it, how he kind of got his break. Because you're going to find yourself in situations where you're never going to know what your break is. You rarely know what your break is. And the thing that you think is your break, the script that you think is going to break things open for you, is never going to. It's always going to come from an oblique angle that you can't see, right? So that's why you want to be as connected and as busy and continually be writing material, because it's a volume business, and your agent is only going to give you 70% of their time for 2 weeks when you have a new piece of work, right? I mean, that's an exaggeration, but the reality is when you don't have new material, they're off addressing another fire. So you want to be good, but you also want to be churning out good material, right? You're not going to serve anybody's purpose if you write 10 mediocre scripts and you write one good one, because nobody's going to want to continue to read your scripts if, they continue to be not developed, right? So to that extent, you need to find professionals that are unbiased, who can read your stories and give you good, solid, constructive feedback. If that means going to pitch festivals, if that means going to, festivals, meeting people, you want to be entering these contests. I know it kind of seems like long shots, but these competitions are ways that people actually get into the business. There's a woman who's a writer in Minneapolis. She is one of the writers on the seasons of True Detective. She, mother of 3 kids, was always creative, wanted to write, and she just kept writing and writing and writing, and she won some contests, and that got her into the world. So that's one path, but I'll get to your other paths as I move along. So generally, again, you may know some of this stuff, you may not. I'm just assuming that you don't have a broad knowledge of pitching, so bear with me if you already know this, but generally how it works is you pitch to a producer, right? Or some exec you meet out in the world. And your first pitch to somebody is probably going to be a very casual pitch. They're going to read a script of yours. They're going to be like, I want to meet you. You go in for what we call a meet and greet. It's usually 15 minutes. Sometimes it's a half an hour. They want to know who you are. They're going to ask you, what's your story? What's your background? Don't read your resume. You want to come up with some sort of a story to tell an executive or a producer that paints yourself in a light as somebody who develops material, somebody who is a storyteller, somebody who moves through the world telling stories, who's interesting and engaging. And everything kind of has to, you want to figure out, if you're writing a brief little bio for these pitch sessions, for when you're meeting somebody, you want to be writing a bio for yourself and rehearsing it in a way that again feels like you're pitching a story, right? That everything you did kind of was leading towards essentially the moment where you got to be in that room, right? So just be talking about things in terms of like that you move through the world with intention. Most people don't, but you want people to know and get a sense that like you're somebody who is continually generating ideas, who understands that how to actually take a piece of experience and turn it into a story, right? So generally, a producer, a development exec is going to read a script of yours. They're going to want to meet you. You're going to go in. It's a friendly, casual meeting. At some point, they're going to say, "So what else you got?" And you're going to want to have 2 or 3 very casual, very, very, very tight, succinct pitches. Can be a combination of a log line with breaking out the idea a little bit. And they may say no. You're going to get a chance to like talk about a couple of your ideas, 2, maybe 3 if you're lucky. If one of them speaks to them, they're going to say, "I like that. Could you develop that more?" And then if it goes well, they're going to ask you to come back and pitch that formally, and then you have to go away and develop a pitch, right? So and again, these meetings work like unless you're setting them up on your own. Your agent and manager, they're going to be setting these things up. You're going to make sure you've got the exec's information, because at some point, if they don't offer it up, you want to ask them if you can reach out to them directly, right, to follow up, because you want to be gaining contacts and people that you can continually come back to with ideas, because they want people who continually generate ideas. That's what they need to keep their jobs and to keep their studios afloat. So So basically, if you get lucky, you have a casual pitch. You know, if you're a more seasoned writer, yeah, you may sell that pitch of like the amnesiac who decides to become a serial killer, right? That's Persona. That's that Turkish series, right? If you have these high concept ideas, but invariably, again, you got to have material so that people recognize what you're capable of. So if you get lucky and you pitch a casual idea and they ask you to develop it and you develop it further, and you sell it and you get lucky and sell it, if you have no credits and you're starting out, they're always going to try to attach a seasoned showrunner so that if the studio buys your pitch and they're contracting you to write a script, chances are they're going to want to attach you to somebody, right? First of all, you may just develop the script with them. And most TV pilots that get bought don't get made, right? I don't know the numbers. I forget where they're at now, but like, imagine 500 pilots are selling every season, right? Just 10 shows get on the air for, any given 20 shows maybe go on the air at any given point. So, and 3 of them succeed, right? So volume business, you want to continually be writing, continue to be working, right? So, So, but generally what's going to happen is you're going to get a meeting, you're going to pitch some ideas. They might like it, you might pitch on it. You may not pitch it in a way that they want it, but that's a relationship. You're going to continually come back to that person to pitch a new idea. But that person is now somebody you can say, hey, I got a great idea. And you're going to want to have a log line or say it's about such and such and such in your email and say, I'd love to come in and talk to you about this or pitch it. And they'll say, great, set up a meeting. And that's kind of how that works. You just have to do a lot of those. And each one is a lottery ticket, right? The whole industry is a lottery ticket, right? So, and the reality here is that, what you're pitching somebody to do is you're pitching somebody to contribute a lot of money. If it's a 10 episode series and it costs $8 million, that's $80 million just in production costs, right? That they have to commit to. So, 2 million is probably the lowest that these dramas are getting made at. And that's like a division at Sony that my last piece was there. And they were trying to make stuff for what shows used to get made for. It's hard, right? So it's a lot of money. It's a lot of resources. And so people are reluctant to spend that money. So people are reluctant to say yes. So they really got to connect to the material and they got to connect to you. Anyway, so that's why you recognize that it's hard, and invariably starting out, people aren't going to pay you, but you have to do whatever job you can get, because the only way you get better, the only way you get into positions where people are going to pay you and you only develop material that you're getting paid for, is that you have to do a lot of that. Unless you're insanely lucky, you have to do a lot of pitching and writing and meeting people, and just recognize that. I mean, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but so to that point, as far as like trying to get into those rooms, you want to read everything you can on the business. Read Deadline, read Variety, read Hollywood Reporter. Go to the library if you can't afford the subscriptions, because they're expensive. You can get that stuff in the libraries, right? A lot of those resources, our libraries are electronic, right? But you want to like go on to, do a trial subscription to IMDb Pro or buy IMDb Pro, because then you can actually find out who people are represented by. Because it doesn't hurt you to reach out to showrunners and writers, directors, actors, people that you like, people you respect. And, they get a lot of that, right? But if you're charming and you figure out a way to, speak to material that they already make, or you figure out that they've talked about, or they've tried to buy certain material, it didn't work, maybe that's an area they like. So you want to just be trying to figure out, how can you make people's lives easier? How can you make your agents' lives easier? How can you make your managers' lives easier? I know you think that their job is to make your lives easier, but they're not. Their job is to sell your material and then sell somebody else's material. So you have to kind of make your own opportunities in that regard. And you do that. And I'll give you one example of that. Somebody read a script of mine. I think it was Mace Newfield's company. They'd done some TV, but like he had done some of the Tom Clancy movies. Anyway, their TV division read a script of mine. I was going in for a meet and greet. My agent didn't give me any background on the company, didn't tell me anything about it, but I did what you have to do, which is you research the company, what they've already made, the stuff that you try to figure out what they have in development. You figure out, Are there shows that developed and didn't happen? You know, a lot of times you'll see a show that gets picked up and bought in, you know, whatever, January of 23, and you realize that that show's not on the air. So you try to figure out what happened to that show. A lot of times it just fell through in development and trying to put it together. A lot of times, like, the script didn't turn out the way the studio wanted. But what you want to do is figure out everything you can about a company that you're meeting with and the person you're meeting with, because you want to be pitching them stuff that appeals to them. You don't want to pitch a sci-fi show to, you know, to somebody who writes, you know, family dramas, right, set in preschools, right? So so basically figure out the market that you're going into, which is not to say to write to any markets. I wouldn't suggest you try to write to what's already on TV, because you're already 2 years behind the curve. So write what you want, write what appeals to you. But just know that if you've got an interesting script that is similar to work that somebody's doing, probably that's a pretty good place to go, right? And back to the idea of the Mace Neufeld thing. So basically, I got they read a thing of mine. I went in and met. I'd done research. I saw that there was a graphic novel that they'd optioned, and there hadn't been any movement on it in the press in a year. And so in the course of that meeting, at some point when he asked what I brought it up. I said, I saw that you guys were developing this book. Where is that at? I mean, and they were stalled. It seemed like they were stalled, and they were. And I had already come up with a take on that. I was like, oh wait, let me figure out how to talk about this idea in a way so I could develop it into a TV series. And sure enough, he sparked to that idea, and I got an opportunity to go in and pitch that. They ultimately decided not to develop that graphic novel further, because I don't know at what point in the superhero saga of shows that we're in, but they decided that it didn't make sense to them to do that. Anyway, but that's a contact that I have, and I pitch to those guys on a regular basis. So to this other point, if you're a non-guild member, the WGA has tons of resources for non-guild members. I would say that the thing you want to go to is the Writers Guild Foundation. It's wgafoundation.org. There are resources. There are events that you can attend. They have great stuff on YouTube. You can watch talks. Subscribe to their calendar, whatever you can get, because the things that are open to non-members are really helpful to you, and it's a way to just talk to working writers, right? So get copies of the members' basic agreement, right? That's available out there. Read what the deals are. Read what writers' rights are. You want to understand all that stuff. One example, you meet with a producer, you pitch a show. Sometimes they want you to leave some paper. They want you to leave your pitch behind with them. Generally it's because so they can give it to their bosses to read, or so that they can pitch it to their bosses and it's easier. You don't really want to do this. It's part of the guild. Like, you're not supposed to give anybody writing for free, period. So you're going to do a lot of work for free. That's just the nature of the business. Maybe you didn't hear that from me, but it's true. It's just how it works, right? So you want to be thinking like a guild, like a working writer, right? How do people operate? How do people function? How do people think of themselves? Anyway, so meet writers. Don't be afraid to talk to people. Don't be intimidated. It's hard. They're more seasoned than you. It seems like everybody knows more than you. The reality is nobody does. Again, luck and timing, right? So I was going to talk a little bit about developing ideas and stuff, but I can see they're at 8:40. Let me talk a tiny bit. Let me kind of really get into pitching, right? A pitch overview, right? Let me give you some practical information here. And I know I'm going to talk a little fast here, but I think you get access to this afterwards so you can refer back to this. But this is we're 40 minutes into this. So generally when you're going to pitch a formal pitch, it's 30 minutes, right? You get about 30 minutes. Sometimes when it's crazy, if you happen to be pitching network stuff and it's in pitch season, which still kind of for network is late summer, fall, you may get 15, but generally you get 30, 45 minutes, usually 30 minutes, and that includes a Q&A at the end, right? So you want to really try to create a pitch that's 20 solid minutes, right? Because again, there's only so much somebody can retain, right? And so develop your pitch. You want to be writing out your pitch, and I'll give you some tips real quick here on like just a working model that has sold things, not just my stuff, but other people who I know have a similar type of layout. It works. Everything really kind of stems from characters, right? So write out your pitch. You want to rehearse your pitch, rehearse it and time it, right? How long does it take you to get through each section, right? And you want to keep revising it and keep rehearsing it until it's a kind of very tight 20 minutes, speaking in a conversational tone, right? And then you want to memorize it. I mean, not everybody does this, but I memorize my pitches, and then I have like a bullet pointed list that I keep on my. You always want to just have your pitch on your lap or whatever, and figure out a way to. So if you're going to get derailed, because sometimes somebody might get confused and ask you a question when you're in the middle of something, and then you get lost, and you want to be able to find your way back in your pitch direction. You never want to go off your pitch because you'll lose people, right? So again, lead people cleanly through your pitch. You're telling them a story, right? Grab them, and then it's like, you wrote thesis papers in college, right? Opening statement is basically your tease, and then you are setting up the case for why this story is good, right? And why that appeals to them, right? So basically, I know I'm not going to get into log lines. I wanted to get a little bit, but log lines are the necessary evil. Everybody hates them. Everybody hates writing them. But I just want to say one thing. The way to think about a log line is not that it's a pain in the neck, but that it is one of the best ways possible for you to refine your idea, to clarify your idea. If you're writing a log line and it's a paragraph long, it's not 2 or 3 sentences, your story may be too complicated, or you're trying to tell too much story, right? So just be thinking about your log lines. Again, very simple. You've got a lead, you've got your protagonist, you've got your main character. They want something, right? That's their goal, right? You want to cross the street, but you know what? There's a lot of traffic. So are you going to run straight through all the traffic and get run over? No, you're going to go this way, you're going to go that way, you're going to go that way, you're going to go around the block. That's what stories are, right? Somebody just wants something, and the idea, the story, the series is about what is in their way, standing in their way, right? So lead character, your protagonist, they want something, that's their goal. What's going to stand in their way, right? What's standing in the way for them to get what they want? There's which is your conflict, the antagonist, right? Antagonist can be some sort of amorphous evil thing like in Stranger Things, or it can be another person, it can be an organization. Chances are you want it to be people working against people. So, and then what are the stakes if they don't get what they want, right? I mean, I'll read you one just quickly. Financial advice. So a financial advisor drags his family from Chicago to the Missouri Ozarks, where he's got to launder $500 million in 5 years to appease a drug boss he became entangled with in Chicago. That's Ozark, right? Anyway, so you just look at shows, Google that stuff. I know log lines are kind of crazy. You could spend an entire hour on any one of these segments in this session, but let me talk about kind of your pitch structure, right? So this applies to features. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different structurally, but so this is basically a pitch structure that has worked in 1 hour dramas. I do know that the team that wrote Fantasy Island had a very similar structure. They were doing more of a procedural. It's like Murder of the Week kind of thing, or like Dream of the Week and Fantasy Island. But so the structure is basically sort of your intro, the sort of inspiration for the idea, or context about why the story appeals to you, or why the context for the story right now. I'll dive into each of these, but the broad strokes are an intro, the inspiration for the idea, why you're sort of the only person who can tell this idea, right? And then you kind of get into a little bit about what the show's about, sort of thematic nature of the show, and then you dive into your characters. You want to get to your characters as soon as possible, right? So you do your main characters. You basically don't talk about more than 6 characters when you're doing a pitch for a TV show. That's kind of all that people can keep in their head, right? Talk about your characters, and then you're really going to get into your pilot, and then you talk a little about kind of like some of the season 1 stories, or where some of those storylines are going. And then you're basically going to be talking about your season stories, and then your pitch is also going to have like where your season ends, where you are at the end of the season, and then you talk a little bit about the life of the series, where things go, and you open it up to Q&A. So let me dive back into this, right? So, and the one thing that nobody will tell you is that, even if your idea came to you, a strike of lightning, you never want to say that. When people are going to ask you about, hey, where'd you come up with this idea? You want to be able to talk about it in a way that feels like it grew out of your own experiences, and that you're someone who took an experience. I May Destroy You, right? The experience that woman went through on writing her show, Marshmallow, became the story that she told in I May Destroy You, right? So you want to be talking about, even if the idea came to you out of the blue, never talk about it like it just, they want to know that you're some mysterious person who comes up with these, who's able to develop these really mysterious ideas and also just is able to develop things from your experience. They want to know that you are the author of this experience. You're the only one who can tell the story, because TV writers are king, queen. Writers are it in TV in a way that they're not in features, right? So just talk about the idea in a way that demonstrates you're the only one who can tell the story, right? So anyway, and if you compare your show to another show, always compare it to a highly successful show. Never compare it to some show that got canceled 3 episodes in, even though it was your favorite show on the planet. People want to know that you're selling them a show that's got a life on the air, right? So you talk about your inspiration. You know, I wrote my current thing kind of is about my mother. It's really about her life, but it's really a character that's kind of a similar character going through what my mother went through, but it has nothing to do with my family. It's not a biography. It's not a memoir. It's just a woman in a very similar situation who is dealing with some very similar things, but there just happens to be some sort of supernatural element to this, which is not something I normally write, but I wanted to subvert the kind of horror genre. Anyway, so you want to talk a little bit in your intro, just where the idea came from. And these are very concise, right? You want to be able to try to get through things to get people hooked about it. Like, oh, that's interesting. That story is, so they know right away when you're going into it, you're the only person who can tell this. I know I said that 3 times, but it's key. And so what's the show about, right? Thematic, like if you're telling a period piece, and I wouldn't recommend pitching period pieces when you're starting out, because nobody wants to do a period piece. And then a period piece on TV makes $400 gajillion and everybody wants to make period pieces. Nobody wants to make period pieces. They want to make contemporary shows. If you're pitching a show, no matter what the show is, you need to relate it to the times that we're living in. Even if it's 2 years ago, 5 years ago is a period story, right? Pre-pandemic is like another world, right? So, but you want to talk about how it's about now and how it's about humans and humans struggling, right? To me, I always like to think about my kind of defining thing about story is I am interested in, right? So everybody's life is about, our lives are basically about, we all kind of live these lives that are us trying to reconcile the lives that we want for ourselves and the lives that we actually have, right? So it's the lives we want, the lives we want versus the lives we have. I'm trying to get my hands in the frame. And then the story is in the middle of that. The story is in the gap between what we want and what we actually live and what we get, right? That's where your story is. That's where almost all stories are, right? So when you get into your characters, you want to kind of like a very brief kind of description of the character. You want it to be a description that really gets at not what they look like, not like, it's all psychological, who they are, right? So you've got your central character. Even Mad Men was about Don Draper, right? The Story of Us really is about the lead character. Right? It's about all those characters, but it's about one. Tony Soprano is the lead character of The Sopranos. It's about the mobs, but it's about Tony. And you learn about the world through Tony's stories. So think of your main character as the sun, and all the other characters orbit around the sun, right? So how does the sun impact your characters, and how does each character impact your main character? That's how you want to talk about your characters in the character section, right? Because people want to know that a show can sustain itself, that's not a procedural, based on a lead character who is so interesting that it doesn't matter really what they do. The way they move through the world and what they do is going to be a generator of story because of the relationships that I have. Your stories will come out of their relationships. The best shows are that, right? So even the story, even The Last of Us, right? It's apocalyptic, but like it's really about those interpersonal. Walking Dead is about the relationships, right? It's not about the zombies. It's not about anyway. So sorry, I'm kind of speeding this up here because I want to get through this. So, and then basically you're going to talk about your characters. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can talk about maybe your primary 2 characters in your first character section, and then you can get at each of one of your rest of your characters and talk about them when you're breaking out the pilot. So you're going to have your intro, you're going to talk about your characters, and then you're going to basically pitch your pilot. You're not going to, you've got 20 minutes, right? Pitching your pilot maybe is 8 minutes, right? In the middle of your pitch. You want to pitch it concisely. If it's on a piece of paper, it's maybe a page, it's maybe 3/4 of, maybe it's a page, 3/4 of a page. And you're basically going to go through the main beats of the pilot. You're going to start with a teaser and you're going to go through the acts, right? If you're going to only set up 1 or 2 characters in your character section, make sure that you say that. Oh, I'm going to get to the rest of our characters in the pilot. And as you break down the character, when that character is introduced in your pilot, that's when you talk about who that character is. And then you integrate that into what's happening in the story, right? So you get through your pilot, you kind of leave us with that holy shit moment. That holy crap moment. And then you want to start talking, since you're always going to be talking about characters, people are not necessarily, when you're doing dramas, going to want to know give me some episodes, like John meets Jeannie in a bar and they have kids. Like, you don't want to tell stories. You're going to talk about stories that derive from the characters, right? So when you talk about your stories, they all want to turn on character motives. Your story ideally wants to be turning on characters, not plot, right? So, so basically, you kind of list these as like, this person is doing this. So you just basically talk about your characters and the things that might happen to them over the course of the season 1. So as your pitch is moving along, you've talked about your season 1 stories, and you want to tell those season 1 stories in a way that feels like you're building to a climax, right? You're telling a story and telling how your season's going to run. Because you can think about your TV show, your series, the whole season 1 is the story. And each episode is an act, right? Think of your series, your season. Say you've got 10 acts, right? 10 episodes. Each one of those is an act in a 10 act story, right? So think about it in those terms. Your season is its own story, right? And you want to build to a climax, and then you start talking about the life of the series. You really want to know that you have your first season worked out, and you kind of want to have a pretty good sense of where the second season goes, and then you just want to be able to generally speak to the rest of the seasons, right? You don't have to get into details. You do always need to know essentially where your show's going. Even if it's just as Vince Gilligan did with Breaking Bad, Mr. Chips becomes Scarface, right? So you know that you're starting out with a sort of hapless, charming person who's going to become a sociopath, right? So, so a couple things. Well, let's do this. Since we only have 8 minutes here, I didn't get to everything in here. Please forgive me. Do you have any questions? And if not, I'll kind of just continue with some of this.
I think, if since we only have a couple minutes left, why don't we, if somebody has questions, they can email me and get questions to you afterwards. But
okay, so we 7 minutes. Let me quickly get to some other nuts and bolts of your pitch and your pilot, right? So first of all, you want to know what you're writing, and I'll say this: if you want to write 1 hour dramas, make sure that your samples are 1 hour dramas, right? If you want to write half hours and 1 hours, you're going to make it harder on yourself. Like, you can do that at some point. Some people do it, but the David Kellys of the world can do that. The Jay Brave, it's like not everybody can do that. People want to know what you do, and they want to be able to kind of keep you in a sort of branded little box there, right? So, if you're writing that, so basically, make sure your samples are the thing you want to write. If you do have a great half hour idea, whether it's a sitcom or like a single camera, the bear basically, right? You got to write a half hour, right? It's going to be really hard to convince somebody that you can write a half hour comedy if all you've been writing is dark 1 hour horror films, right? So just logic applies, right? So how many acts? TV, it changes. Right now we're at like 7 acts in network. It was 5 for a while. It was 4 for a long period of time. You want to write a particular show. Those scripts are available everywhere. Every script's available for the WGA. You can go to the Shabelson Library at 3rd and Fairfax. Non-members can go into that library. You go online, schedule an appointment. You can get any single script almost every script that's ever written. And when in doubt, watch a show, count the commercial breaks if you're doing network, right? If you're writing cable dramas, it's a little bit riskier, but you can basically just write it like a feature and don't include your acts. My latest pilot with the execs, we just decided not to put the acts in, just simplicity's sake, and we were trying to cut a couple pages. So basically, you can leave those acts out, decide whether you're going to write a procedural or a drama. Basically, people will say 48 pages to 56, 57. I'd say keep your pilot shoot for 52 to 54 pages, right? Because if it's a drama without commercials, what's this? If it's a limited series based on a book, do you still pitch? What does this say? you're always going to be pitching, right? So no matter like, I wanted to get into IP. Like, IP has been the word of the moment for a while, because it's so hard to predict what people are going to want to watch. You want, like, if you can find books or magazines or things that are interesting to you, and you want to adapt that, and those are things that, like, people have watched and have a built-in audience, the tip is to basically reach out to, if it's a publisher, if it's a magazine, and if it's a book, you want to reach out to the publisher. You want to get a hold of the subsidiary
Pardon
rights
me.
to the, yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yeah,
I'm the
of
one who
course.
wrote that. Thank
Oh, yes,
you.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Book was optioned, pilot is written, about to pitch. The question is if the pitching still should be approximately 8 minutes for that pilot, since it's an 8-part limited series, 1-hour episodes.
Right.
Thank
So,
you.
and the 8 minutes is not set in stone. The idea is, like, people can only retain so much, right? So knowing you have 20 minutes, if it's a book that exists, if it's in the market, if it's already got a viewership and they're already familiar with it, or chances are they've gotten familiar with it by the time you're pitching it, I still think you may do a much more involved pitch, but generally you're probably not going to get more than 30 minutes in a first meeting with in a follow-up meeting, or, because you're going to need to have, like, an initial meeting, or somebody's going to know the book exists and say, oh, they have a great pitch on it, let's bring them in. You may initially have a very casual pitch and then develop a more in-depth pitch. But just count on a 30-minute pitch. But again, that's going to be determined. Like, your rep or your manager or whoever you're getting these meetings set up with, you're going to know how long you're going to have going into it. And you're also going to get a little bit of, but what you really want to be doing, even if it's a limited series, you're still, like, every show really may only ever get one series, right? And you're always going to want to know the details of where your first season goes, right? So I would say you're still going to talk about the pilot, because I'll tell you a little bit of inside information here that an exec I know who works a lot with Netflix, because their model is streaming, they know who their audience is. They know that if people don't watch the pilot, that show's not going to get watched. So at Netflix, you have six pages to get the exec, the development exec, the reader hooked. If they're not in by 6 pages, they're out. They're not going to read anymore. So the same with your pitch. Just strong stuff up top. If it's an existing thing, yes, you're going to need to develop a regular pitch, because they need to know how your series is going to look. But really, they need to see how your pilot is going to go, right? And then you talk about those other episodes. You can maybe talk about them in more in depth. So maybe what you do is, in developing that pitch, you're still going to talk briefly about your characters up top, but maybe the bulk of your pitch is, you're gonna touch a little bit more at the end of your pitch on where each of those episodes goes. Maybe a little bit more so than you would in a normal pitch. But again, part of this is being open and amenable to things changing. But whoever's setting up your meetings, if you're getting meetings set up, you'll know going in. You're never going to go in blind. You're going to know who you're pitching to. You're going to know what they're looking for. Just be as prepared as you possibly can going into it, because chances are, like this, I've got so much more to talk about. This should be at least 2 hours, but you never want to not have an answer for somebody, right? So know your story better than anybody, because if they know it better than you when you're pitching it, you're in trouble, right? Unless they're really excited and they've read the book 5 times already and they find that you're the right person to do it, right? So yes, so I would still think of it as a fairly traditional pitch. Yeah.
I do have to wrap up now.
Yeah.
There's another panel, but
guys, reach out to Andy. Like, if you have follow-up questions, be specific. A specific ask like that is perfect. It's easier for me to get back to, especially based on my time. And just bear with me. If I don't get back to you the same day or right away, I will. Just be as specific as you can in your ask, and I can be more helpful that way.
all right. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.